Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary, where today we continue working on our Vampire Survivors clone featuring Candy. Last time we attempted to add more weapons from Vampire Survivors into our clone, specifically covering some of the dual weapons that shared behaviors. And overall it was decided that despite being a clone, trying to recreate Chaos 1-for-1 just wasn't gonna be possible, especially given what we're tackling in today's session. So let's get to it. But first, a quick update on previous weapons. The Cross and Axe have had their movement speeds altered to ease in over time rather than instantaneously. It's a subtle change, but it really helps to smooth out the visual experience of those weapons. Anyway, with those changes noted, let's get to the new stuff. The first weapon added this session was the Shadow Pinion. This is one of the more unique weapons in the game and as such would require its own array. When the player is moving, their position is periodically recorded to that array. And once the player stops moving, projectiles, which I named drills, would be created based on those array entries. And much like the actual weapon from Vampire Survivors, those drills would be sent in the direction the player is facing at that moment. The end results were, in my opinion, pretty similar to the original. However, my experience with the original is pretty limited, so there could be elements I'm just not aware of. All in all, it felt accurate, so it's on to weapon number 2. Up next was the Celestial Dusting weapon. And nothing too special about this one other than the fact that it fires backwards, and a new literal extra variable was added to the projectile object. Speaking of which, in the projectile object, dusting would behave similarly to the rune tracer, but also use that new extra variable to hack in a different speed value depending on circumstances. For example, the petals created at the end of its lifespan share the same properties but are set to a slower speed. And again, the results are pretty similar to the original. Much like the Shadow Pinion, I've not used the weapon much, but outside of needing a variation in flower styles for the projectile itself, this seemed like a solid weapon where the player farts out flowers that fire deadly petals as if it's a friggin' Bulbasaur. Honestly, I've only recently unlocked this one and it still kind of confuses me as to what it's supposed to be. But anyway, that's the flower farting weapon, so let's move on. Weapon 3 is Corello. The dangerous wheels of doom are, much like the farting flowers, not too complicated to create. However, in the projectile object itself, they required some special code. These wheels are unique in that they just had to check for horizontal collisions in order to bounce left and right while running over poor saps in their path. Yet another pretty simple though somewhat confusing weapon from Vampire Survivors, slaying those bloodsuckers one wheel at a time. Anyway, the final weapon added this session was the Gotti Amari. Like the last two weapons, the creation code is nothing we haven't already seen before. However, the projectile code was anything but. First, if the cats existed for long enough, it's returned to the pole. Next, cats would face the direction that they're moving on the x-axis. Said cats would then bounce off all surfaces to remain within the play area. Following that is the hitless code, so enemies are only hit once per cooldown. Next were a couple of collision checks, one for the player, which we'll come back to later, the other for fellow cats out there scurrying around. When a collision is detected between cats, they are shifted into a new state. In this new state, a collision circle replaces the original cat projectile, existing for like 2 seconds. And obviously, these collision circles can't hurt enemies until recalled. The cats were one of the more confusing to figure out, so it wouldn't be a surprise to learn I missed something. However, as difficult as it was to test, things seem to be working correctly, and I'm assuming is somewhat similar to the actual weapon from Vampire Survivors. Also, fun fact, this is probably my least favorite weapon in the game currently. Anyway, that would do it for the additions this session, and with it, I think comes the end of adding weapons from Vampire Survivors. This has been decided for 2 reasons. The first is that we need an end goal, otherwise this process of playing catch up may end up continuing for way too long if it hasn't already. We have enough to work with as is, and just in time too, because I feel like recent weapon unlocks for Vampire Survivors has gone beyond simply playing the game casually. The newer weapons have been a lot more unique and fun to recreate. However, it feels like it's reached the point where unlocks have become somewhat of a meta-driven slog, so we've still got a lot left to add to our clone, but weapons will no longer be a focus. And I think just to spice things up, we'll be taking inspiration from other Vampire Survivors clones for some of those remaining elements. But that's for another day. For now, this brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary. So if you enjoyed today's entry, consider leaving a like. Be sure to also subscribe and hit that bell if you haven't already, and let me know what you think of the progress made today. Also, how did you react to the flower farts and other weird weapons in Vampire Survivors? Leave your thoughts, opinions, and stories in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.